Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Johnson, and this is Thought by Thought Healing, where I talk about everything related to TMS and mind-body syndrome. I talk about chronic pain and chronic symptoms and why, because of current neuroscience, we really can recover from these symptoms that we used to think were irreversible. I come at this from a Christian perspective, so if that's important to you, then you're definitely in the right place and you should subscribe. I'm a chronic pain coach, and you can read more about my story and my programs on my website, which is thoughtbythoughtealing.com. You can follow me on Instagram and on Facebook, also thoughtbythoughtealing.com. If you listen to me on podcast platforms, it would be awesome if you could leave me a review. Apparently, that's how you get the word out. So thanks in advance for doing that. So on this show, I have a lot of different experts that come on, and I just interview them and ask them all the questions, from psychologists to doctors, to people who have healed or are still in their healing journey. We can learn from them all. And today I had the honor of interviewing Dr. Dan Ratner, who, if you can't tell by my change in voice, was just really an honor. And everybody has a little bit of a different perspective on, because of their own journeys, on what the journey involves to recover from chronic pain. And Dr. Dan Ratner, as he said, I should call him just Dan. Dan and I align a lot on what that involves. And so that was really just enjoyable. And I think it will be for you also, and hopefully enlightening for how you can kind of gear your healing journey. Dan also has groups and different programs that you can check out. I'm going to put all his resources in the show notes so that you can check out his website, specifically his 3-column system. Let's see. What else do I have to say? I think that's about it. I just want to read a little bit about who Dan is, and we'll go from there. So Dr. Dan Ratner is an internationally known mind-body expert and the podcast host of Crushing Doubt, which is available on YouTube and Spotify, and lays out his unique column system to organize mind-body experience and help people alleviate both chronic and acute pain and other symptoms. After his profound life-changing experience resolving his own chronic back pain, he has since become a leading expert in the field, curing hundreds of pain sufferers with these scientific and logical methods. His 8-session seminars teach people everything they need to know about the mind-body process to put their questions to rest, and his membership groups allow ongoing, cost-effective access to him on a weekly basis to work on understanding and alleviating alleviating symptoms. His long-anticipated book, also entitled Crushing Doubt, is in the editing phase and soon to be available on his website, www.crushingdoubt.org. Just a couple more things about him. Dan was raised in Shaker Heights, Ohio, in a family with a deep expertise in psychological tradition. He completed his undergraduate work at Brown University. He spent 2 years in Teach for America in Compton, California. He went on to get his master's and doctorate in psychology from Widener University and was a staff member and training director of Fordham University. Dan now created and runs a full-time private practice dating back to 2007, first in New York City and now virtually from Cleveland. So, without any further ado, I give you Dan in this just really fun conversation. All right, have a good day, you guys. Bye. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm super excited. Today, I have none other than Dan Ratner with me from Crushing Doubt. So, Dan, how are you today?
I'm really doing well, and I'm excited to be here with you.
Sweet. Me too. And so is everybody else. Okay, so I've had quite a few people on the show that have had back pain, and I know that that is a part of your story, which I do want to hear about. Can we start there and just hear a little bit about your journey, and then mostly like how you got into mind-body medicine from that part of your story?
Sure. I mean, they go hand in hand because that's the reason I got into the work. So I'll try to give the brief version. You can ask me if you want more details. I remember them all very vividly,
Mm, mm,
um, as I think a lot of pain sufferers do. These are traumatic experiences that people have
yeah.
when typically they're sailing along through life, maybe not sailing through every part of life, but sailing through their physical life without realizing that there can be something like this, and then boom. And that's what happened to me. I felt a little twinge in my back when I went to tie my shoes one day, and I just thought, okay, I'm getting a little old. Hilariously, I was 28 at the time.
So old.
So old. Um, but I thought, okay, fine. I guess I'll just need to do some stretching. But there was one thought I had in the back of my mind, which is such a mind body sufferer thought, and it was, what if?
Yeah.
What if this is going to become something bigger? I didn't think that much of it, but it did start to become something bigger, and then it kind of escalated more and more. And very shortly after, a couple days later, I was very, very tight, and the back hurt a lot. And then I started to have spasms, and I did not know what was going on. I mean, I had never seen anything like this. And to make a long story short, it unfolded in ways where it felt like it was getting worse and worse. I finally went to the doctor, figuring, okay, well, doctors will know what to do about this. And then I was really shocked again. They not only didn't seem to know what to do, they seemed perfectly content with the fact that this was a problem that was going to stay.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is going on? Then I went to a physical therapist, and I found a similar type of thing. They didn't seem content to let it stay that way, but they seemed baffled. And I kept thinking, I can't be this weird. This is so, like, what's happening here? And I really was at a loss. I was even at a loss with regard to the people in my own life, my family. I didn't know what to say to them, because I felt like, you guys are telling me to do this and now it's not working and you're not even helping. I was like, so many sufferers get left on an island. That's really what happened to me. And I did not realize I was going to have to really claw my way out of there. And I tried lots of different things over time. I remember I was meeting with a colleague at work. I was a therapist at a college counseling center at the time. And she said that she had back pain. And I heard that past tense. And I was like, what? What'd you do? And she said, well, I went to a chiropractor. I hadn't been to a chiropractor yet. And I was like, okay. I mean, I tell people all the time, I would have drunk a bucket of sand to get rid of the pain.
Yeah.
Yes. It was every day, every moment. There was no break from it whatsoever. I could take Advil and that would help. Though looking back on it, I actually think that was a placebo help more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have any relief. I felt very alienated from people. I felt very frustrated that they didn't understand, that they weren't so empathic. It felt like my whole world was just turned upside down. So I went to this chiropractor. This is turning into a long story. I apologize.
It's fine.
But I went to a chiropractor, and I took to him very quickly because he actually wanted to get to the bottom of it. He just cared.
Yeah.
And he thought he could help. And so I did whatever he would say. And sometimes he would tell me to do things that I was like, I don't understand why this would help, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
I changed my diet to get rid of sugar at one point. It seemed to help in a certain way, but I couldn't explain why. He, adjusted my back, and the spasms did not go away for a full year after the adjustments. And actually it got worse during the adjustments. But I was like, at least this guy feels like he knows what he's doing. And the spasms were just agonizing. They were the worst pain I've ever experienced. And now I will make a long story short.
Good luck.
Yeah, I kept talking to the chiropractor, and I was like, I was about maybe 50% better. He had successfully gotten me to stop spasming, which was a godsend. And at one point he mentioned Dr. Sarno. He said, some people get something out of reading this book. Maybe you would. And I thought, wow, I've sunk really low. I'm going to read a self-help book to get out of back pain. Well, it was obviously so much more than that. But I bought it, and it just stayed on a shelf for about 10 months.
Oh, you didn't read it right away. Okay.
No, I felt like, okay, yeah, I'll get it. And maybe one day I'll do it. But then at one point, I think he either mentioned it again or I just remembered it. And I thought, I'll try anything. Why am I not reading this?
Yeah.
And I picked it up, and within 3 pages, I was like, oh man, this is a whole different world.
This is me.
And yes, that was so key. I recognized me. He started talking about goodists, and I was like, Oh, I've never been. I was better described in a back pain book than any psychology book I had ever read, or even literature. I'm an English major. It's like
Oh,
I saw in Dr. Sarno, I was like, that's me right there.
yeah.
And
That's
that started to get me out of it. I can tell you more details, but I already went on long enough.
You said something that I want to ask about. You said you had to claw your way out of there. Are you talking about the medical system?
No, I didn't have to claw my way out of the medical system. I abandoned them very quickly.
Okay.
Uh, I don't. It's funny. I'm a trusting person,
Mhm.
but at the same time, I don't trust most people. I found. I trust more people now, but at the time, I was very trusting. I was willing to go along with it, but when people show signs of I can't trust them, I mean, I have a trauma history. I just shut down. I was like, nope, okay, we're not going there anymore. You're out of the loop. I didn't know where to go, but I did not have to claw my way out of uh,
Okay.
the medical field. I think a lot of people do have to do
Mhm.
that. They get so much bad information and they go down rabbit holes. I didn't have that happen.
Okay.
But I really empathize with people who do have that happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I did mean about clawing my way out was more figuring out what was happening. And I had to do that all for myself.
How long ago was this?
That was in 2011 that I read Sarno.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot more resources available now than I
Oh, I think
assume there were then.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
including me.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I created a lot of my resources to be what I wished was there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, so at that transition, you've discovered this, then you start the healing process. For you, I'm just curious, how long was the healing process for you, if you use that word?
Um, well, it's interesting. I don't object to the word. I never object to whatever words people want to use. I don't tend to think about it as healing either for me or other people, unless it's from a true injury. Um,
Right.
but it is a kind of healing because it was more a healing of the mind.
Mhm.
And I was wounded from my past trauma history, but I was also wounded from this experience. This 8-year experience was its own trauma and one of the worst I ever had.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of healing that needs to take place. I think it can easily get confused with physical. So the way I think about it is, when did I begin to sort out and understand what was happening? It's all semantics, but um, when I read the first Sarno book I read was his first book, actually. It was called Mind Over Back Pain. It's not one that people often read that much, actually.
Mhm.
I
Right.
hear people read Healing Back Pain more than any of the 4 books he of the other 3 books he wrote. And ironically, that's the only one that I didn't read until later.
Hmm.
So I read Mind Over Back Pain because the chiropractor only wanted me to go so far with Sarno. He was like, listen, he starts to say stuff that I don't agree with.
Oh,
So I read Mind Over Back Pain. It started to make sense, but I didn't get any real physical change, but I was very excited and hopeful about it. And I just kept working on it. And when I started to get real change was it was over a 2-month period. When I read Mind Over Back Pain, I started talking to the therapist I was seeing at the time. I don't know if you've seen me talk about my therapy experience, but I had one therapist who was really difficult for me.
Yeah. You hated him, right?
Oh yeah, I hated him. I think he might have hated me even more, but that's okay.
It's
Uh,
mutual.
to each his own. Everybody can have bad taste sometimes, and he did. um, and I really I work hard to make relationships work. It doesn't matter who the relationship is with. I like to have harmony. I don't like
Yeah.
conflict, so that was really hard for me. But
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
started to run these ideas by him, and he just wasn't buying them at all. And he was just like, I just think you have a bad back, which is not very helpful for me to hear and
Uh-uh.
completely incorrect at the same time.
Mhm.
But during that time, he went away for a week in the summer and my back pain went up. So this is something that can be helpful for people, is to recognize it's not always your symptoms going down with the mind body work. Sometimes the symptoms go up, but seeing the correlation makes a difference. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I can't believe I'm bothered by him going away. I hate his guts. I don't even want to see him. It's a relief that he's gone. How on earth am I getting pain while he's gone? And some of it was I just couldn't believe that I would be bothered by a week's vacation. I was like, but that's not the way the mind works. It's not the way the unconscious mind works or your emotions work. And so I noted that. I still didn't totally believe it, but then he was going away again, and the pain went up again. And then I was like, okay, this can't be an accident, no matter what I think. And I decided, all right, time to do something about this. I'm going to read another Sarno book. I'm going to read his latest one, The Divided Mind. I'm going to go see. I just started doing everything that I thought I should do in a like TMS mind body model. I went to see Eric Sherman, who trained under Arlene Feinblatt and Sarno himself. And this is part of why I do what I do. I went to Eric hoping to find a mind body expert. I didn't want a therapist. I wanted a mind body expert.
Yeah.
And I don't say this critically of Eric at all. I love Eric, and I understand why he does what he does. He is truly a therapist. He's a mind-body informed therapist, but that's not what I wanted. And he said that he couldn't see me while I was still seeing the other therapist because that went against kind of therapy protocol, to undermine the other relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm getting hit on all sides here. I can't get the help I need because I'm seeing a therapist who I hate. I hadn't come to terms with how much I hated him at that point or being ready to leave him. Because if I had, I would have just done it. So I thought, okay, fine. Well, let me ask you, can I ask you some questions? I said to Eric. He said, yeah. I peppered him with like 200 questions. Everything I wanted to know from what I was reading in Sarno. And he answered them really, really well. And it was very helpful. That one session showed me just how important it is to conquer doubt. And I felt significantly more optimistic after that. I went to read The Divided Mind a couple days later. I was on vacation reading The Divided Mind, and 3 days later, I was doing flips in the pool.
Yes, that's amazing. I was going to ask you why Crushing Doubt was what you named your platform, your program, what you're about. And so am I understanding you? It's kind of from that conversation of having somebody to answer your 200 questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the birth of the doubt column right there. The original seed of it was from reading, especially The Divided Mind, and getting Sarno saying it's how important it was to accept the diagnosis. That's the original idea that I heard. And I really, I give Sarno so much credit for so many things, but including that. He didn't highlight it as much in his books in terms of doubt, but he did say the people who don't accept the diagnosis don't get better. So I was thinking about that. Then I thought about this session with Eric Sherman and thought, wow, look how much more optimistic I am about getting better now.
Yeah.
And started to think about it in those terms. Once I got better, that's when I really started thinking about what was that? And that's when the concept of doubt came to mind.
Do you remember any of the 200 questions?
I probably remember almost all of them, but yes, I can give you some.
Can you just a couple that you think other people might have too?
Yeah. I thought, well, I had been in a car accident when I was 24 years old. And I was like, is it possible that just finally like caught up to me, the wear and tear of that? And Eric was like, no, injuries hurt when they happen, and that made sense to me. That was one. I remember asking, is it possible? Yeah, I love my wife. We have a very good relationship, but there was some tension in the relationship at that time, as there often is in relationships.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him, is it possible that my mind-body issues are caused by my wife? Actually, she wasn't my wife then. She was my girlfriend. But
okay.
I was like, can it be caused by someone else? Because what I was thinking in my head is, do I need to get rid of this person I love because they're causing these problems? And he said, you could be married to or with the worst person on the planet. No, actually, that's not true. We were married already. I'm losing track of time. But he said, you could be married to the worst person on the planet who puts you through absolute torture, and that is not the cause. It comes from whatever's going on inside you. So that was another one.
Yeah. I love
Um,
I absolutely love that statement. So
yeah.
keep going.
I remember asking, you know, is it possible that, uh, well, actually, this was a big one. I said, I'm reading Sarno and he talks about repressed anger, but I have like 15 years of therapy experience and I'm extremely aware of all kinds of anger. How do I understand that?
Uh-huh.
And what he said was, a lot of times it's not about a lack of awareness of the anger. It can be about a lack of awareness about your feelings about the anger,
Mm.
which was interesting. That didn't even prove to be the whole thing, but it did answer it in a fairly nice fashion. I asked him about goodism. I was like, he talked about that. I was like, is this really as typical as he says? He was like, all the time. You're a poster child for this.
Mhm. It's helpful. Yeah.
I mean, I could go on and on. You tell me when I
Yeah.
should stop reciting the questions that I had, but
Oh, well,
I had so
they're
many.
really good questions. Going back a little bit, did you discover what it was about your therapist going away for a week that um, that made your pain go up? And I asked that because we all have um, instances where something good happens to us and our pain goes up. And
Mhm.
I have my own way of answering that question, but I'd love to hear you just talk about your therapist goes away. It's a good thing. Awesome. Your brain, your subconscious mind should be at ease a little bit more, and yet it's
Oh,
not.
yeah. Well, I certainly do have that experience in myself and talking to other people that good things can lead to symptoms going up. That was not actually one of those, though. Even though I was kind of relieved he was going away, as I look at it, as I look back at it now and look back at it for all these years afterwards, that was a kind of reenactment of abandonment. It wasn't good.
Oh,
Um,
I see.
that was simply, no matter how much I'm mad at this guy, I can't believe he hates me.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was hard for me. I mean, I grew up. You sounds like you're pretty aware of what my experience was, and have watched some things of mine. But I didn't have a father for a long time, and I didn't feel valid in certain ways. And I think his going away in the non-caring way that he did just felt invalidating. I can talk about times where I felt something good and the pain went up, but that wasn't one of them. That was a time where it just actually was some real grief and trauma reenactment that I just wasn't aware of.
Yeah. Um, we've brought up the word trauma several times, and I have this towards the end of if we have time, I'd like to talk about trauma, and yet I'm just feeling like I want to talk about it.
Okay.
Um, oh, how do you work with clients who have trauma? Actually, I'm going to just jump to a question
Sure.
um, that somebody sent me.
Mhm.
If PTSD is the underlying reason, then do we separate treatment because trauma is stuck in the body? So somebody emailed me that, well, Instagrammed it to me today.
Mhm.
Um, I yeah, just talk about trauma and its role in this and how and as a word. Um, what does that
Yeah.
word do to us, etc.?
Yeah, and it's a really tricky word. It's a tricky
Mhm.
word for many people. It has all kinds of meanings and connotations, and some of the connotations people don't want any part of. That I didn't want any part of that. I didn't want to think of myself as a victim at all. I didn't want to experience myself as having had trauma. I've changed my idea of trauma. The way when I'm talking about trauma, I think everybody has trauma of various kinds. It's traumatic to be a person, actually, in many ways. But there also is trauma with more of a capital T, big things that happen.
Yeah.
The way I think about trauma is they're experiences that alter who you are. They're so big that you can't be the same person anymore. So it's almost like the old person died. Um, and I'm painting with a broad brush here. So,
Yeah.
I want to reserve the right to back up and get more detailed and nuanced about it. But
Great.
I think that that's a good way of defining it, essentially, is did something really alter who you are and how you think about things?
Mhm.
And, I've had many different kinds of experiences that I actually would categorize as trauma, but I don't mean it in a I feel bad for myself sort of way, or I want somebody else to feel bad for me, or I'm diminished in some way.
Mhm.
If anything, I was very standoffish about that word because I didn't want to see how I had been hurt.
Mhm. Yeah, repression.
Yeah. And I'm very struck by when people talk about that trauma gets stuck in the body. The way I think about it is a little different.
Okay.
I don't think that trauma gets stuck in the body. I think it gets housed in the body. And I think that's a very different, it's an important distinction
Hmm.
because stuck sounds like it's not going anywhere. It sounds like you're locked into it because of your experience.
Yeah, forever.
Whereas I think the body expresses it until the communication is received, until you understand that. But when you
Can you
understand that,
unpack that more?
I can try. um,
What do you
yeah.
mean by the communication is received?
Okay. So in my work, I have the 3 columns, and the power column is the place where we look at our relationship with ourselves. The symptoms communicate different things in each column in my system. In the emotions column, it is simply that distraction that Sarno talks about. They're not communicating, they're trying to hide. They're trying to hide it. That's the function.
Yeah.
The function with doubt is to just keep itself going and growing, to keep you from being able to discover anything. It's like a gigantic smokescreen.
Yeah.
It's like as if the emotional distraction isn't enough. It needs to get you completely confounded so you can't see your way out at all.
Mm.
But the power column is a kind of thing that you can discover that these symptoms are trying to tell you something. And I discovered that because when I figured out my back pain and got better from it, I understood a lot of things about myself that I didn't understand before.
Yeah.
So I understood that this therapist, much as I hated him, did mean something to me. And it was hard for me that he didn't like me. And it was hard that we weren't getting along. And it was hard that I was going to have to end that relationship. I knew it at some level. It was and the back pain was also communicating to me all the things that I had hurt from in the past. I knew I had a dead father, but I kept saying to myself, I never even knew him. Why is this a big deal?
Mm.
Well, the symptoms were communicating this is a big deal. And now I understand why. It's true, I didn't know him, but I also didn't feel valid because he wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I also felt mad at him that he wasn't there. And I write songs now. I've started writing songs in the last 3 or 4 years, and I wrote a song about him and the fact that he knew he was dying and he didn't write me anything.
Mm.
The song's called No Letter.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know that I was so upset about it.
Right.
But I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the communication you're talking about. Your body is communicating, please acknowledge
Your own hurt.
what you, yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes the symptoms can be resolved if you just solve that distraction, if that's the only real function of it. And sometimes the symptoms can be resolved if you just bring down the doubt, and then you can get back on your way. But if it's what I call a power column function, you've got to receive the communication, or the symptoms will just keep on holding on.
Yeah. And that means feeling our feelings, right? In that case.
Yes, although I would just add one thing. It's feeling the feelings and understanding them. I think that's what you meant anyway, but I think it's a helpful distinction to add that in.
Yeah. Yes. So then going back to this person's question, if PTSD, which can be complex, CPTSD also, is the underlying reason, then do you separate treatment because trauma is stuck in the body? So you're saying it's in the most gentle kind way. It's not stuck there. It can be communicated and come out. So there is so much hope. But then what about this question of separating out treatment?
It's a great question. I'm going to try to answer it, but I would say to the person asking this question, don't stop asking your questions even after this one, because I'm not going to answer it to the full satisfaction in all likelihood.
Yeah.
That's part of what I learned with Eric Sherman. It's like there was always a question after the question.
Yeah.
But I'll start. I think uh, I think some of it depends on who you're working with. You know, there are people I think in the mind body field who are capable of helping you with mind body issues and doing trauma work. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
In my groups, you know, I the power column is where you do work on the trauma. So we really do. And it doesn't necessarily need to be separated. However, there are times where the trauma experience is so big, or so its own entity, that it does help to have two separate ones. But I don't think of them as separated. I think of them as um,
Yeah.
simpatico kind of. So I'm a big proponent of having multiple treatments going that do address different things, because it can be helpful. When people come to me in group, I can then work on the column system and helping them understand their symptoms, and they have their own therapist for trauma work. It happens all the time. I
Yeah.
do trauma work as well within the column structure, but if it needs to go beyond that, I don't think it needs to be separate, but I think it can be adjunctive, and I think that can be very helpful. So hopefully I answered that question
Yeah.
relatively
I like it. I like your answer.
well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So thanks for answering the trauma questions. I just,
Sure.
yeah, I think the idea that something we know that words are so important and they hold so many connotations for each person differently. So for one person to say trauma is stuck in the body means something to the different to the next person.
Exactly. Yeah. Some
So
people could take comfort in it. They could be like, "Oh, good.
right,
Now I understand what's happening," and they're on their way. But for people
right.
with, I'm totally with you that language is so important.
Yeah, yeah. So however you use that term, the bottom line is that there's hope when we start to recognize what's happening in the body and that there's a way out.
Mm-hmm.
Not to quote the book, but um, okay. So we've definitely jumped into Colm's work, but for everybody watching, just in case you don't know, Dan Ratner has this columns work that is just really makes it simple for us, right? Can you just unpack what that means and just a little bit more about that?
Sure. And as I worked over time, it became very important to be able to simplify it. I wasn't actually simplifying what I was saying. What I'm saying actually is simple, but I needed to figure out how to say it
Yeah,
relatively simply. So here it is. Um, well, I'm going to give a little bit of backstory, then I'll give you the simple.
great.
When I read Sarno, I needed to understand why there were certain distinctions between things. And one of the things I needed to understand was, why are there some acute short-term symptoms, like he described getting heartburn while on a trip with his wife in the book, and I'm like, what's that versus my 8 years of back pain? Why
Hmm.
is there a distinction? So essentially what I found out in asking all these questions and exploring all these things is that the symptoms are there for three different reasons, and those three different reasons funnel out into the columns, and they tell you how you're supposed to work with them. So if the symptom function is that distraction where the symptom is there so that you don't know about your emotional life, that's emotions column.
Yeah,
And that is for acute onsets and upticks in symptoms. I can always address those things. If I hear about an acute symptom, when did it pop up? I'm like, what's the timing? I start working in the emotions column immediately.
yeah. Okay.
If a symptom has been there for a long time and is always the same, though, that's not the same thing. That's not a distraction. That's becomes something else. That's about doubt. So this is the doubt column. I don't use the term chronic. I call it consistently acute, which means it is always there, but it still is acute. And once you break that idea down, it's much easier to move. But essentially, the doubt column is where you just need to get all of your fears down, your confusion wiped away. You got to get to certainty. You got to get all of your questions answered to your satisfaction. And when that happens, you get to move out of what people see as seemingly chronic. Go ahead, and I'll get to the power column in a second.
The and when you say doubts and questions, are you specifically talking about? I'm going to just say that the science of um, TMS, or
That's
does
part of
dark?
it. I'm
Okay.
talking very broad. Any There's 4 types of doubt: fear, confusion, lack of certainty, and questions.
Okay.
And if you have any of those about anything, then you have doubt. And the door is open for you to worry about the symptom and think it's not going to go away. Because if you don't understand something, how can you think it's, you're going to have a harder time believing you can get rid of it. So you could have doubts about the science, or you could have doubts about your particular symptom, or you could have doubts about the diagnosis, or you could have doubts about your ability to manage this and master it, even if it is mind body. You could have doubts as to whether things are even knowable. I mean, doubt has no bounds unless we give them bounds, which we need to.
So in your own journey, was this column important to you? Was this column difficult for you?
This column was it difficult for me? That's a great question. I would say that it is the column that is the one that caused my symptoms for all those years. But I would also say that it is the column that resolved itself the fastest.
Yeah. Yes.
Once I really had the doubt down.
Okay.
So I was giving a simple explanation, and I think it'll be easier if I back up and say it again, just for the simplicity of it. The emotions column is for the acute onset or uptick in symptoms. And you find out what the emotion is, you get rid of the distraction, and it's gone.
Yep.
The doubt column is to get rid of seemingly chronic conditions, consistently acute as I see them, by making sure we understand everything about what we need to know, so we are completely confident in the diagnosis and that it's reversible.
Yeah.
And the power column is about, and we already talked about this some, receiving the communication of the symptoms, which is really about understanding yourself and coming to peace about yourself.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Powerful. Okay. So let's see, I was going to have you give examples of all these, but I feel like you've maybe done that all. So the difference between the emotion and the power column, do they overlap sometimes?
Yes, they do. They are both emotional columns.
Yeah.
Actually. I don't want to get confusing calling it that, but it really is true.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it is the power column runs deeper than the emotions column. The emotions column is like, okay, this person's doing something that reminds me of what my mom did here, and that's upsetting, and I don't like it in this situation.
Yeah.
The power column is like, I see this, and this is how it always is. It gets much broader.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only are the functions of the symptoms different, but the depth of the emotion is different.
Yeah. Do you believe, and part of what I love about the show and any show is that we have people on that have difference in opinions on all this. Do you believe we have to change to heal? So let's say you discover people pleasing is rooted in some trauma in your childhood. And you have this trait, people pleasing is generally rooted in distress or some sort of fear. Do you believe that we have to reduce how much we're a people pleaser?
This is a great question. I would say yes. I do think that you have to make changes, but I want to make a caveat about that.
Okay.
I don't think you have to change who you are. I don't think you have to change who you are at base. So in other words, you can be a people pleaser as long as you don't do it too much. It can be who you are inside. You can have that impulse, but you need to know about that impulse and control it a bit. You also don't have to change super radically. Sometimes it's not even about the actual outside behavior. You could go on pleasing people, but you could at least know there's a part of me that doesn't like this, and I'm only going to take it so far, or I'm only going to do it for certain people.
Yeah.
So I think what it's really about is learn who you are and channel it into the universe in a better way. It's not so much that we have to change so radically. There are times, though, where we do, where we have to make a pretty big radical change.
Yeah.
I just think it comes naturally to the person when they understand themselves. So Hopefully I didn't answer that question in a muddied sort of way.
I love the way you answered that question, and I think my beliefs along that align with yours. And uh, um, I think there's something to the fact that a lot of those personality traits were learned. So, is it fair to say maybe I'm not at my core a people pleaser? Um,
Yeah, actually, that's a fantastic point. Yes. A lot of the times, the things we need to change aren't really us.
yeah, yeah,
Here's a good example. Am I a people pleaser? Actually, I don't think I am at heart. I did that a lot.
yeah.
What I am is I'm empathic, I'm caring, and I will go the extra mile for people. But that's not the same thing as being a people pleaser.
Love it. Yes. Yes. It's intentionality, right? Like instead of being victim to people pleasing, we're saying, "Hey, this is part of me is that I care about people and I'm going to do it with this I don't know, this motivation. It's a lame word, but that is powerful
Yeah.
opposed to
Yeah.
being controlled by."
Yeah, I liked you chose the word originally intentionality about this, and I think that's a really good word for this. But to be intentional, you need to know who are you at your core. So in the power column, I have this thing called the core narrative, where you
Oh,
find your center story, the center story of how you've suffered in your life. So we have lots of stories, and that's how we know who we are. Like I am a person who did not feel valid for a long time and now does. I mean, maybe not at every moment, but mostly.
yeah.
And that makes me, I was people pleasing to fill the void of that lack of validity.
Mhm.
The caring me hasn't gone anywhere. I'm very similar to how I always was. I just don't do things that sacrifice myself for false motivations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mean that critically of myself or anybody else who is working with those. I think finding out who you really are is key.
Yeah.
Which I think is even, when the original question was, do you need to change yourself? I actually think it's more you need to find out who you are.
Yeah. Yes, and work towards going back to, I mean, back to, is that fair? Or some of us, some of us never had the opportunity to be who we were.
Exactly. Yes, I didn't.
So, yeah. So
I didn't.
finding it.
Yeah, some people go back to it. Some people go to it for the first time.
Yeah. Yes. Mm. Good. Good conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. So go back to this core, what did you say? Core narrative, core story, core.
Core narrative. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, we can call it lots of different things, but that's what I call it.
Okay. And is this the core narrative of what you went through and what you are struggling to fight to overcome, or is this the narrative of who you want to be?
Yes. It's both.
Okay.
Here's what the core narrative is. The core narrative is 3 sentences. And the first sentence
Oh.
is, what is the central way that you suffered in your life?
Mm.
If you had to sum it up in one sentence.
Yeah.
For me, it was mostly about validity. I can take you through some of the specifics, but you want to get that main idea. The second sentence is, how did that affect you? What are all the ways in your life that had ramifications?
Mm.
And by the way, these are long sentences. They can be
Okay.
Charles Dickens sentences. They can go on and on.
Okay.
Sometimes you can get them pretty short, but
There goes the English major in you.
yes, exactly. And actually, sometimes people have a longer version of this too. They write it originally and it's like 4 or 5 sentences each to get the ideas, and then they slowly hone it down. It can be good to have a longer version. The third sentence is, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to live differently?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you briefly, essentially, what mine is.
Okay.
Mine essentially is, I was born into a situation without a father, and I got lots of signals that I was supposed to be kind of secondary and subservient to other people's needs. And it made me sacrifice myself and feel that I wasn't really valid on my own. That's sentence 1. Sentence 2 would be something like this. And I don't have this memorized or anything. I reinvent it each time, but it's the basic idea. The second sentence would be, this led me to please people all the time, to avoid conflict, It led me especially to try to please my abusers.
Mm.
It led me to be very cautious in relationships, but in a very secretive way that no one could really see. It led to me having a lot of anxiety, including like a major phobia. It led me to stay out of romantic relationships for a long time.
Mhm.
It led me to essentially have, there's a therapist named Donald Winnicott who used to talk about something called the false self. It led me to not be fully me
Yeah.
and to feel like there was no place for me in the world.
Mhm. Mhm.
It did other things, but that's, among them. I often felt not understood also. That was another part. And so then when you get to the third sentence, what am I going to do about it?
Mhm.
Well, here's what I decided when I finally realized all this. I decided I would not sacrifice myself ever again in any kind of major way. That doesn't mean I wouldn't make sacrifices or be, cooperative or anything like that. I'm still a very cooperative person, but I wouldn't sacrifice myself in ways that really contradicted who I am at my core, no matter what anybody thought. And I also was going to stop looking for any father figure. I wasn't going to look to anybody else for my power. I was going to get it from me.
Mhm.
And I was going to, there's a phrase that I use called being fiercely in your own corner.
Yes.
I decided I was going to be fiercely in my own corner. And that word fiercely is the key because we're all in our own corner to some degree, but we don't tend to be fierce about it.
Yeah.
In fact, we're so not fierce about it that we usually aren't even in our own corner.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was a big part of my story is somehow I learned that it was not okay to be in my own corner. It
Yeah.
my job was to be in everybody else's corner, which is like you're saying is wonderful. It is so great to be loving and caring and to look out for one another and um but but we need to be in our own corner too. Otherwise, literally in my own body became unsafe. Like my nervous system, my brain, my body was operating as if I was the enemy, and I was.
Everything was unsafe for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived over 40 years of my life with essentially everything being unsafe.
Yeah.
I mean, I made it as safe as it could be within the confines of that.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like saying, yeah, I kept safe on this World War II battlefield with mines everywhere. Like, that's not safe.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no relaxation and peace happening there for sure.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So that's so we've got the Collinsworth and the narrative, and that is. Were you going to say something?
Well, I was just thinking, sometimes when I'm sitting with somebody and hearing what they went through, it's hard for me to not wonder. So and maybe we need to have a second conversation about this where I get to find out what did you go through?
Yeah.
And what was this experience like for you? So and that's not people pleasing. It's just genuine curiosity and
Yeah.
interest.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a whole nother session for sure, or conversation. I um I really like the way you've lined out those three sentences. And I'm very aware of sentence 2 and 3. Number 1 is a little bit more difficult for me. And I think this is inspiring me to look back and kind of summarize in a way that I can easily I don't know, bring it to mind when I
Yeah.
experience small things that trigger that.
I have a suggestion that could help with that, not just
Great.
for you, but for the people tuning in here. The way that you get to that, and you asked this question, how do the emotions and power columns relate? And they are both emotion-based columns. Well, the way you get to sentence 1 of the core narrative is to take all the themes that you develop in the emotions column, because that's the work that I say to do there.
Yeah.
Is to find the main areas of life that are upsetting for you. That's the emotions column. And I encourage people to come up with, usually the guideline is about 6 to 12 themes. Less than that is usually not describing a person very well. More than that starts to have gradations where some are more minor and some are more major. But if you take those 6 to 12 themes And you said, now what are all these themes saying together? That's
Yeah.
how you can get to sentence one.
Yeah. And I think my history is going to be complex PTSD. And I think for me, I learned that I had to be perfect, morally perfect. And so that brought, so I do this channel from a Christian perspective. I'm not sure if we talked about that or not, but
I think
so
I did know that. Yeah.
yeah. So for me, I learned things about God that were untrue. And what I really mean by that is I did not learn about his grace. I did not learn that it was absolutely okay for me to be flawed, I'm going to use the word sin, to make mistakes, and be safe in that. So I had a narrative of shame. And then in my adult life, when things happened to me that were that invited judgment, or others' opinions, I was stuck because I couldn't please everybody, and therefore judgment came upon me. It wasn't even from God now, it was from people. So there's this fear, shame around I have to make the right decision and the right choice every time, and I don't know how to answer that or.
Right. All the more scary.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
So my healing was all around that and learning, oh my gosh, I get to be flawed. I get to be flawed on this show. I get to be flawed in my personal life. I get to be flawed in my relationship with God and with my friends and my family and all those things.
Yeah.
And if they don't like it, well, that's okay. And saying all this stuff, I have great peace in my body. So that 2 and 3 are solid, but the 1 is a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think you can get there. I even have some idea from what you just said about how I'm thinking about it, but it doesn't matter what I think. Only you will know. But I think what you're describing is exactly the work of the power column. You came to peace where you could finally relax into yourself. And it was partly because you realized, oh, I really wasn't even giving myself space to be safe, even with God, you know?
Yeah.
It was like, that peace that you have. And I was the same way. I wouldn't say I was a perfectionist. Like I felt I needed to be perfect in reality, but actually I was always just like, okay, I'm not trying to be perfect. I just can't do anything wrong.
Yeah. Right.
What's the distinction,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think what I came to understand is very, very similar to you, if not exact. I came to realize that my sense of needing to not do anything wrong was a lack of safety. It was a self-attack. It wasn't allowing myself to be in my body or the world comfortably at all.
Yeah. If my safety is reliant upon how people perceive even my thoughts, not a moment for safety, not a moment for my body to be at ease. And I want to clarify, just because of my watchers, this had nothing to do with what God was saying to me. It was all about my own voice and voices that I had believed, yeah.
Yeah. And when you've gotten nothing but those messages, it distorts all kinds of things. You can't.
It does. Yeah.
I mean, I saw the whole world as watching for me to make mistakes, and the second I would, they would nail me to the wall.
Yeah.
And of course, I was doing that myself to some degree, but we get it from the world too.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
It's interesting because I actually see, in talking to you, I can see you. I hope you don't mind me saying this. I mean it as a compliment, but I can see you in the flow of yourself where you let yourself just be, and that's the way I am too. A lot of the time, the majority of the time. It's like when we talked about this show, I didn't prepare at all. I just I'm just here to talk. I'll say all kinds of things.
Because who you are is okay, and who you are is safe.
That's right.
And that matters. And rewind 4 years, there's absolutely no way that I would be on here interviewing you, talking to you, talking about myself, in the flow that you're talking about, the comfort.
Sure.
And so it's about learning what you're talking about. That third piece to me of how'd you put it? What am I gonna do differently? Or what am I gonna do about this?
Mm-hmm.
And getting back to that, okay, what's my core identity? Um, who am I minus all this crap that I really don't want to carry with me?
Absolutely. You know, I started my podcast and show about 2.5 years ago, and I was a very different person even then. You know,
Mhm.
the idea. I mean, I had been silenced my whole life. I didn't think of myself as a leader at all. In fact, I was always somebody who I could lead as long as I was one of the top followers. Also, you
Mm,
know, I had to be below the leader. I couldn't really speak for myself that much,
interesting.
and
Yeah.
so I really want to put a plug in for people that you can change a lot. I mean, I was
Yeah.
a shy kid, couldn't have imagined being a leader. And you know, I now understand certain things about myself that I did not understand before at all. I kept thinking, as an example, so I've told you I write songs, but I've played guitar and sung for a long time. Only figured out how to write songs in the last 4 years or so. But I used to think I would love to be in a band. I don't know why. Why don't I? Why haven't I found some? I'm a huge Beatles fan. I'm like, where's my John Lennon? I like to think of myself as a Paul McCartney type. And I was like, I can't find anybody even. I can't. No offense to Ringo, but I can't even find a Ringo. You know, although drummers are actually very hard to find. I've really gone off on a tangent now. But what I found is, I think the reason that I didn't find anything like that is that it's not who I am. I'm not a follower. I
Yeah.
didn't know, but I'm a leader.
Yeah. You
That's where I
didn't
fit.
know. Mm-hmm.
So I was always fighting me.
Mm-hmm. You were fighting the false, who was it you quoted? The false identity, the false self?
Yeah, for Winnicott. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. False identity, that really resonates with me. I do that work with my clients too. True self, false identity. What is it that we believe? And when that false identity, we do have to, I hate the word fight because fight is not a sense of peace, but uh, confront. Uh,
I I understand what you mean though. Like if I can voice it, I
yep.
do. It's a very different kind of fighting. It's a good fighting.
Yeah.
I mean, we
Not
could call it
fear.
advocating maybe, or we could call it, but it's fiercer than that.
Yeah.
I sometimes say to people, you have to stage an inner rebellion
Yeah.
where you are not going to settle for not being you
Yeah.
ever.
And that oh gosh, we're running out of time, and we're just gonna have to get some of these questions. Um, so
I can stay longer, whatever you need.
right. So so that fighting, being fiercely in your corner, um, when I first started doing that, I had flare-ups. But those flare-ups were so I now look back on them, and I think I did slightly at the time, is they were slightly beautiful, because it was that my false self kind of scared, if you will. Um, and so can you just talk to that about that piece a little bit for people? Because I think a lot of times people start doing this work and then the symptoms go up, even as they're getting in their own corner. And what's
Oh
that
yeah.
about?
Yeah, I tell people in my groups, especially because we talk these things through a lot, that when you are either preparing to become powerful or taking steps to become powerful, doubt comes crashing in.
Yeah.
It wants to prevent it because doubt is there to protect you from perceived dangers.
Yeah.
And we were trained that being powerful was dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, I was told, don't make you big ever.
Yeah.
So the idea of I'm, working on finishing up my book. I'm having more flare-ups during this time as I get closer and closer.
Mm.
But knowing that helps because I know it's not going to last. B, I know what it's about. C, I can spend time thinking about the right things and be
Yeah.
back in my power column and thinking, boy, that really was hard to be taught that you shouldn't be powerful. That
Yeah.
really sucked.
Yes. That whole thing about being powerful, I think also, again, just talking to my watchers, I think sometimes in Christian culture, we're told we can't be powerful and big. And I just want to argue back that with that and just say we're absolutely empowered. And it's and it is good and right to be exactly who you are intended to be. I was working with the client not that long ago. We were talking about the size of plate and what triggers and what doesn't. And I was like, well, who are you naturally? What size of plate do you want to have? And she was like medium. And I was like, great, let's not make, I have a large plate. I naturally have a large plate. And I want that. So let's look at what is powerful and big to you. And I guess kind of what I'm getting at, Dan, is like, um, are there people who can be powerful in a less visible way and it's still powerful?
Oh, absolutely. I I,
Yeah.
I don't presume to know anybody's story or who they are or what they need. Um, if, for example, somebody grew up in a family where the value was getting accolades and making lots of money, but really what they want to do is raise kids, and that's their power.
Yeah.
As long as you actually feel powerful, that's all I care about because
Yeah.
that's going to align with you. And that can be in all kinds of ways. People could feel that being a school teacher. That could be their power.
Yes.
And then for some other people, they're like, I might think about being president. It's like
Right.
it can it can really vary. And the nice thing I found is that when you find out who you are, you don't really have to worry about that. You just start going for what you want. I recently I'm making a transition in some of my work because I got my degree in psychology, my doctorate degree in psychology in 2004, and I saw lots of long-term patients. And after discovering this symptom work and developing my system, I so much more want to be doing that.
Mm. Yeah.
And what I found is me as the therapist didn't feel like that wasn't my plate, to use your terminology. That
Yeah.
was a plate that I thought was acceptable. It was good work.
Mm.
I did a pretty good job, but I wasn't kind of thriving and vibing with me.
Yeah.
Now I'm writing songs and screenplays,
Yeah.
and I made a documentary, and I'm like, I do a lot of stuff. It can be a
That's,
little much, but that's my plate.
yeah. And you thrive in it and you like it and it's flow and it's good.
Yeah. Yep. And if I feel it isn't, I back up and say, wait, why am I doing this?
Yeah. Yep. Documentary?
Yeah, I did it. Actually, you'll be interested in this. This documentary is all about God, actually.
Oh, wow.
I worked with Freddie Stevenson is his name. I had him on my podcast and show. I also do some sports shows, and he originally came on the sports show because he wanted to make it in the NFL.
Oh.
But when he didn't make it in the NFL, his life fell apart, and he had to really put himself back together. And how did he do it? He really did it through God.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
and it's his story of redemption. It's his story of finding out who he really was. He thought he was a football player, and that's not actually who he really was.
Yeah.
It was a part of who he was, maybe, but it wasn't the central part, and he knows that.
Yeah.
So this is the movie's called Trials to Triumph. We are hoping to release it in May.
Okay.
So
I assume you'll blast that out when that
I
happens.
definitely will.
Okay. Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We're hoping it'll be widely distributed.
Freddie Stevenson?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Freddie.
Okay.
That's his first name.
Sweet. Yeah. Okay. Can I blast you with some questions that I told people I would ask?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay. First one. Ooh, that's a long one. We're going to skip that one, come back if we have time. Any tips for coming off of benzos?
Oh, I do have tips. coming off of benzos may be a little bit different than what I'm about to say, but this relates.
Okay.
In terms of coming off of benzos, one thing I do know is that medically speaking, you should consult with a doctor about that, just because if you come off of benzos fast, it can be medically dangerous. But as long as you're following the medical advice, here's the main thing I would say.
Yeah.
There are a lot of mind-body experiences in that.
Yeah.
I had the experience, it was after I ended, or it was about the time where I was getting ready to end things in that bad therapy relationship. I had huge anxiety. For the first time in my life, I took antidepressants. I had never done anything like it. I never thought I would.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't like being on them because he convinced me to be on them. And he was actually probably the reason I was on them in a lot of ways. It was really complicated.
Yeah.
And when it was time to get off of them, I would wean myself down, and then I have all these symptoms, and I'd be like, are these side effects of the medication, or are they mind body? And I had so much doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the time I thought, I have no idea. It really could be the medication. Well, what I will say is, as I worked at it, the vast majority of things were actually mind body. It just is that strong.
Yeah.
And so my tip would be, work at it slowly, but recognize that every single one of those side effects, unless they're really, medical in that very big way, work at them, because every single one of them, you probably can reduce some. And if you find that you can reduce it some, then that means that there's at least a mind-body component, and then you can keep going and do it little by little and give yourself time. Don't try to do it fast. I brought myself down. I said, I'm going to stay here for 2 full weeks. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then eventually I got off of it, and I felt much better.
I remember coming off and just like kind of crumbling the pill and just taking like a tiny, just the tiniest granule out. And then, and it was not benzos, but
Yeah.
and I knew that it was just my brain in fear of coming off the pills.
Yeah.
But I chose to be kind to my brain and just
that's exactly what I would say. Be kind to yourself about it. You don't need to be a warrior about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't like to give myself more of a triggering experience than I need to.
Right.
I might as well wait 2 weeks, and fine, I'll cut the pills in half, even if it's completely ridiculous. If it helps me, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I even, this may sound silly, but this fits with the kind of thing we're talking about. If I'm looking like, let's say, at a piece of food, and I'm like, I'm not sure if this food is still good, I'm not eating that, because it'll give me a trigger.
Yeah.
It probably is
Yes.
fine, but why should I subject myself to it? I don't want to. No.
Yeah.
I think it's similar with getting off of medications. You be kind to yourself about it. Take it slow.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate how much can be mind body, and get the feedback little by little that can convince you.
To clarify, I am sure that I know what you meant by food, but you mean as if it's expired or gone bad.
Yeah. Yep.
Not like, oh, there's gluten in this, I should never eat gluten.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. No, I mean gone bad. Yeah.
Okay.
All that other stuff I tend to think is almost always mind body. But
agreed. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What about POTS? I've developed POTS. I can barely move and my joints have become weak. I think the question here is it mind body syndrome?
Yes. So when it comes to things that are supposedly medical conditions, which I you have to call that supposedly, almost, because there are certain terms that are called medical, and if we let them be just called that without recognizing, actually, maybe they're much more just part of the mind body field in the first place.
Yeah.
It's important to do that. But I have consulted with medical doctors, especially mind body informed ones. There's some great ones in the field. And I consult with them sometimes just to make sure, in case I'm not sure. So I've looked into virtually everything. And POTS is mind body. I don't mean it insultingly in any way. I mean it to inspire hope, because, and this is something that I say to people that sometimes can help them, mind body symptoms are the most severe symptoms I've ever had. And so if you're having really severe symptoms and it's super messed up, and you're having something that is, presenting like POTS, your life's getting wrecked by this. Do not underestimate what mind body symptoms can do. Yes,
Yeah.
they can do that. I've seen it many times. I've even worked with people with POTS, and they have gotten better from these things.
Yeah. I love that you say that because often, you know how it is. You have to be careful how much you talk to people and how you talk about it. But I have a friend, a very close friend, whose response around something related to back pain was like, "No, I know that my back pain was real." Insert trigger, and
Oh,
then
yes.
and
Because mine wasn't.
right, and then uh, the next response was, because I know this because my pain made me to the point that I couldn't walk. And I was like, yeah, I used a wheelchair a couple times and it was all mind body syndrome. Absolutely. The intensity of pain does not reflect on it being structural versus not.
Mm-hmm.
So,
If anything, sometimes it's the opposite.
yeah, I agree. Do we have any data for that? Because I don't think we do, but I totally agree with you.
I'm mostly speaking to it's anecdotal, but not just with me, but with thousands of people I've interacted with.
That reminds me, I had a client once say that the mind body pain was worse than childbirth. I
I've had people say that to me too. I'm obviously very careful about saying that as a man. I have no idea, but
right.
when women say it, it's extremely convincing because I'm like, well, especially the people who are mothers.
Yeah. I do not have
uh,
children, but when she said that, I was like, that's powerful. Yeah.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
The
It was
brain.
actually kind of validating for me when I heard a woman say that. I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh wow,
Mhm.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I've gone through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. I did have one more question, and I wonder where I put it. I wrote it down because it came in this morning. I know that it had to do with someone saying they had a lot of symptoms, and one of the most extreme ones was insomnia, which is actually a big part of my story. They want to know if you have any tips for that.
I do. As always, I say I'll give you these tips, but then bring your follow-up questions. People can contact me if they want to, or if they contact you and you want to get me in touch with them or them in touch with me, that's absolutely fine. Keep asking the questions. But here's my first answer to it. Insomnia is 100% mind body.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say virtually all the time. I think it's just all the time. And I have a couple of tips for it. And they go in different directions, by the way. In my
Mm,
column system, I describe what I call action steps. These are things that you choose to do in a given moment that can help.
okay.
And sometimes one thing's going to help, and sometimes another thing's going to help. So sometimes with insomnia, this is just one example, you're forgetting to enjoy that you're in bed with nothing to do. And if you can sink into that, you can actually fall asleep. Other times, you have something on your mind and you could be given like a horse tranquilizer and you wouldn't fall asleep
Yeah.
because you are really on something
Yeah.
in thinking, and you need time with that. So get up and let yourself think.
Yeah.
Particularly if you know you're angry about something. I sometimes write emails to myself that I'm not even going to send because I don't like conflict and I don't need that. And it's not even about the external environment, but I need closure with myself.
Yeah.
And if I'm going on and on and on about it, I let myself go there. Here's another tip, and these all can apply at different times. Sometimes you are, without realizing it, restricting where your mind can go. You're
Yeah.
having a thought and you think, oh, I shouldn't be thinking that. That's not going to calm me down. Go exactly where your mind goes. That's another tip. And here's another one.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's helpful. And by the way, all of these I found through myself. I
Yeah.
had to figure out different solutions at different
Okay.
times. It also can help me before I go to bed, especially if I'm like waking up with nightmares or like kind of panic wake ups.
Mhm.
It helps me to take about 15 minutes before bed and think about what happened today.
Yeah.
What was my emotional life like today?
Mhm.
Because then I won't be doing the work later.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are 4 different solutions that go in totally opposite directions.
Mhm.
I also meditate sometimes. That can sometimes help, but
Yeah.
find the action steps that work for you. But those are some examples.
Yeah. What I love all those. I'm going to steal a couple.
Yeah,
um,
feel them all. They're
great.
all free.
One of them too for me was I used to thank my brain like when I couldn't sleep, I would just be thankful. I knew that it was working for me. I knew that like there's
Yeah.
something back here that it's struggling with and it's doing the work for me. And I would just thank it and kind of let it do its thing. And not try to stop it. So I think that's similar or different take on
Yeah,
one of your
very similar.
examples of letting it go where it wants to go. Okay, so good. Can you, in closing, can you tell us all about your programs, your website, your podcast, which is a subscribed one, or just talk about that?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Crushing Doubt. The video version is on YouTube. The audio is on Spotify.
Okay.
And we're in transition from it being free to becoming subscription based, but I try to give some free resources as well. I do a weekly Q&A every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific.
That is so powerful. For any of you who haven't listened to that, do. That's
Thank you. It's look, that these are the Eric Sherman sessions. I just show up every Thursday to be like,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Yeah.
ask me the questions.
Bring your 200 questions.
Yeah. So my website is www.crushingdoubt.org. If you happen to put in .com, it goes there also, so it's fine.
Okay.
And on that website, you can find all of my programs. And my primary programs at this point, aside from the podcast and the Q&A, are the teaching seminars that I do.
Yeah.
And the groups. And the teaching seminars are designed to tell you how to think about the column system and why it can help explain a lot of the contradictions that or seeming contradictions you may hear in the mind body community. What I find is we're not contradicting much, but there isn't a lot of integration that can help people feel like they understand the whole picture. And that's what the seminars are designed to do. Help you see how the whole mind body experience hangs together and the columns can describe it.
Yeah.
Once people have that basic information, then there are the group memberships where people can come. They can meet with me once, twice, or 3 times a week. And these are Zoom calls where people get on. Sometimes people don't want to come on video. That's fine. They can put things in the chat. And they ask me their questions about how do I apply what I've learned.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, when I've listened to those, it's surprising how often somebody asks a question that you want to know the answer to, or you don't even realize that you wanted to know the answer to.
Yeah, it's so powerful. Sometimes people ask me with respect to the groups, they're like, will I have enough time to ask my questions? And of course, I want to give everybody time, but typically the people who do the best in the groups, and it's the vast majority of people, they learn so much when they're not the ones talking. They're listening and they're like, oh, I see me in that.
Yeah.
Oh, I get that now. So they're learning the whole time, whether it's them or somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And then people can buy your different programs, like the columns work and whatnot off your website, right?
They can. I actually just completed an introductory course also, which, for people who don't really want to dive in the deep end, I hear this all the time. People are like, I've spent so much money on different resources. I want to be able to check this out without committing too much. The introductory course is a nice way to do that. You find out about the column system, and then you get to decide if you want to go further. So that's available too, although actually it was supposed to be available yesterday and isn't yet. So it should be, by the time this comes out, it will be available for sure.
Okay.
But you can get the seminars on there, and they're pre-recorded seminars. I am going to be going back to doing live ones eventually, but right now I'm taking time to finish off the book. So you can get the seminars, you can sign up for the groups, you can get the introductory lectures. I also have written materials right now, these mind body guides, if you prefer to take things in a written way. So many ways to get help.
Yeah.
I also have trained people and, people who are interested in training with me in this. That's something that I do because I need good referral sources. You know, we talked about, do you divide up treatment? Well, this is part of how. I like to have people who understand my column system, but could do therapy. Because what I do isn't really therapy anymore. What I do is educational and, you know, informing about this process and system.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, Dan, I've loved this conversation.
This is great. I
Yeah.
talk to you forever.
Yeah, totally agree. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, on behalf of everybody else, also thank you. And I'm just going to say goodbye to all the watchers, and I will see you next week. Have a good one. Bye. But you don't leave quite yet.
Okay. That was great.